February 1992. NBC Studios, Burbank. Johnny Carson leaned back in his chair, pulled the earpiece from his right ear, and set it quietly on the desk. His producer's voice was still coming through it, faint enough to ignore. "Stick to the plan, Johnny. The album, the tour, nothing personal." Carson left it there. 30 years in that chair had taught him one thing above everything else. He could read what people were carrying before they opened their mouths. And the man sitting across from him tonight, the man who had sold 100 million records, whose face had been on more magazine covers than anyone alive, had walked onto this stage carrying something he hadn't told anyone yet. "Michael," Carson said, "no rush. I've watched you perform for 30 years. You walk onto a stage and 100,000 people forget where they are. But when you're up there, who are you really singing to?" The studio went quiet in a way studios don't usually go quiet. Michael Jackson had fielded thousands of questions. He knew exactly what to do with them. The corner of his mouth started to move, a smile forming, something smooth and practiced. And then it stopped. His shoulder began a shrug and dropped halfway. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Carson. "I had a friend," he said, "growing up in Gary, Calvin Reed." His voice was different. Not the voice from the interviews, not that careful, precise thing he used with reporters. Something underneath that. "We used to sneak out to the rail tracks on the south end of town, past the steel mills. We'd sit there and just make up songs. Stupid songs. Songs that disappeared the second the train went by." He stopped for a moment. "My father thought that was a waste of time. My father thought everything that didn't make money was a waste of time." Carson said nothing. "Calvin passed away 3 weeks ago," Michael said. The letter had arrived at Neverland inside a plain envelope with a Chicago postmark. The handwriting belonged to someone Michael didn't know. Calvin's younger sister. She hadn't written much. Cook County Hospital, his liver. He had dictated the letter because his hands weren't steady enough to hold a pen, and he wanted Michael to know where he was. Bill Bray found Michael an hour later, sitting in the living room with the letter still open in his hand. The television was on. Michael wasn't watching it. "I need to go to Chicago," Michael said. "Tomorrow, just us." Bill had been with Michael since 1971. He knew when not to ask questions. The next morning they left Neverland before 7. No disguise, no entourage. Just a cap, a plain jacket, Bill driving. On the way to the airport, Michael didn't say anything, and Bill didn't fill the silence. That was one of the reasons Michael trusted him. Bill understood that some silences aren't asking to be filled. Calvin was on the 4th floor, room 412. He was smaller than Michael had expected. That was the first thing. The way illness takes the size out of a person. Calvin's eyes were closed when Michael came in, and Michael stood just inside the door for a moment, because walking across that room felt harder than walking onto any stage he'd ever stood on. On a stage, you can decide who to be. In that room, there was nothing to be but himself. He sat down beside the bed and waited. Calvin opened his eyes. He looked at Michael for a long time. Then something shifted in his face. "Far," he said. A childhood name. Something Calvin had invented when they were 9 years old for reasons neither of them could remember anymore. It had never gone anywhere but between them. "Hey," Michael said. Calvin closed his eyes, opened them again. "You still remember that song we made up by the tracks? The one your daddy said was too loud?" Michael didn't answer right away. "The one about the train going somewhere we couldn't name," Calvin said. His voice was slow but steady. "Every time a freight went through, we'd sing it. We thought we'd write it down someday." Michael said yes. He remembered. Calvin smiled. Then he was asleep. Michael sat with him for another 40 minutes. He didn't try to wake him. When he finally stood up to leave, a nurse in the hallway looked at him and started to say something, and then recognized who he was, and didn't. In the elevator going down, Michael took out his phone. He dialed a number he hadn't dialed in months. Joe Jackson picked up on the second ring. The television was audible in the background, the way it always was. "Michael." Flat. Alert. "Something wrong?" "No," Michael said. "I just wanted to hear your voice, Daddy." Silence. 5 seconds. Maybe 6. "All right," Joe said. "You okay?" "Yeah." "All right then." The call ended. Michael stood in the hospital parking lot. February in Chicago, and the cold came up through the concrete. He smoked a cigarette. He almost never smoked, and when he did, it was somewhere no camera could find him, and stood there until he felt like he could walk back to the car. Bill was reading in the driver's seat. He looked up when Michael got in. He didn't ask anything. The only thing Michael said on the drive back was, "Tell Carson's people yes." The taping was on a Tuesday. Michael arrived 2 hours early, which he never did. He sat in the makeup chair and looked at the mirror without moving for a long time. The makeup artist asked if he was all right. "I don't know," he said. She repeated that story for years. Not because it was unusual, because it was the most honest answer she'd ever heard from anyone in that chair. 15 minutes before airtime, Bill found him standing near the stage door, listening to the audience settling in. "Just the music, Michael," Bill said. "The album, the tour? Nothing heavy." Michael looked at him. "Bill, in 30 years, in every interview I've ever done, you know what I've never once done?" Bill waited. Answered a question they weren't expecting. Outside on the sidewalk, a small group of fans stood behind a rope. A kid, maybe 9 years old, was sitting on his father's shoulders. When Michael walked past, the kid shouted, "Are you really the king of pop?" Michael stopped. Looked at the kid. Started to say something. Didn't. He raised one hand in a kind of wave and kept walking. The question went with him through the door. The first 20 minutes of the interview ran exactly as planned. The new album, the world tour, what the dangerous era meant for him. Michael was precise, occasionally charming, professionally warm. Carson was experienced enough to give him room and wait. Then they came back from commercial break, and Carson set the earpiece on the desk, and the question he asked was not the one anyone had prepared for. Michael looked at his hands when he heard it. Just for a second. Then he told Carson about Calvin. He told him about the south side of Gary, about the way the whole neighborhood smelled like hot metal, and the ground shook when the big freights came through. He talked about making up songs that evaporated the moment the train passed. Songs that were never meant to last. He said his father considered that a waste of time. He said it without bitterness, the way you say a phrase you've heard so many times it stopped having an edge. "Calvin passed away 3 weeks ago," Michael said. "I went to see him before he died. He didn't recognize me at first. Then he did, and the first thing he asked me, the very first thing, was whether I remembered that song, the train song." He stopped. "I've been on stages in front of 100,000 people. I've done that more times than I can count. And the whole time, I've been singing behind my father's back." He said it quietly, not for effect. "I'm still sitting on those tracks. I'm still that boy from Jackson Street who just wanted to make something." Carson watched him the way he watched guests when he'd stopped being a host. "I called my father from the hospital parking lot," Michael said. "First time in months. You know what I told him? I just wanted to hear your voice, Daddy." He let out a slow breath. "You know what he said?" He took his time. "All right, you okay? All right then." He said it in the rhythm it had happened. Those 3 lines. 30 years. That was the whole conversation. Somewhere in the studio audience, a woman was crying. Carson's expression didn't change, but his jaw was tight. "Maybe they're all real, Michael," Carson said. "Maybe the question isn't which one is real. Maybe it's which one you allow yourself to be." Michael looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly. The way you nod when something lands in you before you're ready for it. Carson never aired the episode. He had told Michael before the camera stopped rolling. "This stays here." He kept that promise. The tape went into a private archive with a case number and 4 words in Carson's handwriting on the label. This was the real thing. That same evening, Michael had a concert, the Forum in Inglewood, 60-something thousand people. The first 3 songs were everything they were supposed to be. The spectacle, the precision, the things 60,000 people had paid to see. He was Michael Jackson, and he was doing it without a flaw. The 4th song was "She's Out of My Life." He had sung it hundreds of times. He knew every note, every place to breathe. But midway through, his voice caught. A small thing, almost nothing. And through that small crack, something that had been held in all day came loose. He lowered the microphone from his mouth. Then he set it on the stage floor. He walked toward backstage and the band played two more bars on reflex before everything stopped. Backstage, he sat on a road case with his hands on his knees. Teddy Riley found him there. Nobody else. Teddy sat down next to him and didn't say a word. After a while, Michael said, "Calvin told me something when we were kids. When the song scares you, that's when you keep singing." He stood up. When he walked back out, 60,000 people rose. He picked the microphone up from the stage floor. He didn't explain anything. He didn't go back to where the song had stopped. He sat down at the piano and played something nobody in that arena had ever heard. A simple thing, a melody that moved like a train going somewhere without a name. The song from the tracks in Gary that he and Calvin had made up 30 years ago and never written down because they thought there'd be time. Nobody knew what they were hearing, but the arena went quiet the way people go quiet when something is true. He played it all the way through. Then he played the rest of that concert, and people who were there said for years afterward it was the best they had ever seen him. Not because of what he did, because of something inside what he did that was harder to name. Calvin died 4 days after the taping. Michael didn't make it back to Chicago in time. He sent flowers. He called Calvin's sister and stayed on the phone with her for almost an hour, mostly listening. He never talked about that call publicly. He never talked about Calvin at all. Joe Jackson died in 2018, 9 years after his son. The phone call from the hospital parking lot, 30 seconds, maybe less, was the last real thing between them. Bill Bray, who had been sitting in the car, said once in a quiet interview that he had heard Michael's voice through the window while the call was happening. He had heard the silence after. He knew Michael wasn't going to bring it up, and he didn't ask. Some things, Bill said, a person carries because there's nowhere to put them down. Carson's tape has never surfaced publicly, and no one has gone looking for it in any serious way. Whether it reached Michael's estate, no one has confirmed. But on the case in Carson's handwriting, there were 4 words. This was the real thing.